Welcome back to the last part of photosynthesis. When I left you last time, I left you with this question, which we answered: how much more ATP than NADPH is required to drive the Calvin cycle? And the answer to that was 50% more ATP. One turn of the Calvin cycle, which fixes 6 carbon dioxides to produce 2 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate molecules, requires 18 ATP and 12 NADPH. So you need 6 more ATP than you need NADPH, and you need 12 NADPH, so that's 50% more ATP compared to NADPH. And the problem is that the light reactions that we looked at produce equal amounts of ATP and NADPH. So that means over time you'll end up in a serious deficiency of ATP, and the Calvin cycle won't be operating maximally to produce sugars. So let's go back to the light cycles here really quickly and just refresh ourselves on that, and then look to see how this problem is solved. So what we talked about is photosystem 2 energizing electrons from water and passing those electrons through an electron transport chain, which produces this proton motive force that ultimately is responsible for the production of ATP. Then the electrons go on to be re-energized in photosystem 1 and donated to NADP to make NADPH. And so this gives us an equal amount of NADPH and ATP. So the question becomes, how can we manipulate this system to give us more ATP? And so here's what happens. There's a mechanism whereby the Calvin cycle is able to signal back to the light reactions, or the reactions which are producing ATP and NADPH, to actually stop making NADPH and only make ATP. So how does that happen? Is what's going to happen is that once electrons come from PS2, so assume electrons have come from PS2 into the electron transport chain and they've got to PS1, rather than going to NADPH, electrons can be directed back into the electron transport chain, so they get re-energized in PS1, passed into an electron carrier in the thylakoid membrane, and put back into the electron transport chain. And so as they come back down the chain into PS1 and they lose that energy, more protons are pumped into the thylakoid lumen to build a proton gradient. Because the electrons aren't going to NADPH out here at the end of the electron transport chain after photosystem 1, that means no NADPH is being made. So depending on the ratio of ATP and NADPH, the Calvin cycle can tell the light reactions, hey, stop making NADPH and do this. This is called cyclical electron flow, whereas what we looked at just now is called non-cyclical electron flow, because it's linear. The electrons come from water and end up in NADPH. Here they can just cycle around, and then when the switch goes back to making NADPH as well, they get passed on through the chain and into NADP to make NADPH. So there's a signal based on the ratio of ATP and NADPH in the chloroplast, which tells the light reactions, hey, do cyclical, now go back to doing non-cyclical. And this way, the light reactions can make more ATP than NADPH, and that means we can keep driving the Calvin cycle because we can keep giving it ATP when it runs out, because it's using more ATP than NADPH. Okay, that wraps us up for our discussion of photosynthesis. There's a lot of information in here. I think this is one of the most fascinating processes you see in biology. I hope I've captured some of the interest here and shown you how complicated this is. I know it's confusing, it's a little overwhelming. It is truly a remarkable process. Before we finish, I'll tell you kind of my story with photosynthesis and learning it. When I started teaching general biology about 10 years ago now, I remember being pretty fearful of having to stand in front of a group of nearly 300 students and explain photosynthesis, and for that matter cellular respiration. And of course I remembered some of it from high school and from college biology. But I remember sitting down and looking at this with the information I had in my head, and looking at the process and being absolutely amazed that this is how it works, because it's not something I fully understood. And so I remember sitting with my book and flipping backwards and forwards and being like, really? Seriously? This is how it works? This is amazing. So there's a lot of fascinating biochemistry here. Humans are just starting to come up with techniques by which we can actually capture the properties of photosynthesis and start actually making fuels by using photosynthetic processes. So I'll stop talking there. I hope you've enjoyed this module. I will see you next time.